Welcome to the Employment Law presentation by Group 4, narrated by Sami Siddiqui. Our group has been tasked to answer the following question. Is violence in the workplace increasing or decreasing? And what can an employer do to mitigate its potential liability for violence in the workplace? Now, this is an interesting conversation because in recent years, it has been reported and said that violence in the workplace has been rising. And although stories of these violent occurrences may be publicized more and more, it seems that there's not an actual truth to those claims. But first, let's define the question and then look at the numbers and stats concerning violence in the workplace itself. So what is workplace violence? The U.S. Department of Labor defines workplace violence as any threat or act of physical violence, harassment, intimidation, or threatening disruptive behavior that occurs at a work site. There are many different types of violent acts. Some are fatal and some are non-fatal. But it is the aim of all institutions, whether large or small, to guard against such occurrences because many times the outcomes can be severe and dramatic for the employers and employees, and as well as expensive and costly for the government and the employers itself. So, what do the numbers show? Well, there's been a substantial decrease in workplace violence over the past decade, with a 35% decline in non-fatal incidents from 2002 to 2009. And in addition, homicides in the workplace have declined substantially by 51% over the last 20 years. Instances of workplace violence were less likely to involve a weapon than non-workplace violence also. And in 2009, there were 572,000 reported occurrences of non-fatal workplace violence, including various forms of assault, and 521 individuals who were victims of homicide in the workplace. Certain professions are more likely to face workplace violence, in particular law enforcement, bartenders, and custodians. The highest proportion of workplace violence was concentrated in the field of law enforcement, which is almost 20%, which includes police officers and security guards, and in-service sector retail sales, which is about 15%. Which includes convenience store clerks, gas station employees, bartenders, and sale clerks. Now, 80% of homicides in the workplace were committed using firearms. The majority of incidents of workplace violence are committed by individuals who are strangers to the victim. Men are less likely than women to know the perpetrator, with 52.9% of men considering their assailants strangers, compared to only 41% of females. Workplace violence was less likely to be reported, with 47% of incidents reported to the police, than non-workplace violence, with 52% of incidents reported. The most common reason victims gave for not reporting an incident to police was that they reported to the superior or other official. And the most common reason victims gave for reporting an incident to the police were to stop or prevent an incident from happening. So now that we have the numbers to show that workplace violence has decreased, we'll move on to the question, how are employers liable? Employer liability under OSHA, or Occupational Safety and Health Administration, it says that employers must maintain a place of employment which is free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm. This requirement is known as General Duty Clause. The most basic common law principle dictates that an employer is liable for the acts of an employee who is acting as the employer's agent within the scope of employment. Also, an employer can be found liable for negligent hiring if it had known or should have known that an employee that it hired had violent tendencies. Liability can extend to the employer even if there were no obvious indications that an employee might be dangerous, but the employer failed to conduct a background check that would have revealed important information about the employee. Employers also have duty to exercise ordinary care. If workplace violence occurs, they may be sued for negligence if they knew or should have known of a potentially dangerous situation. Lawsuits could be based on negligent hiring, training, or supervising of the dangerous employee. Employers may also be sued for negligence if a customer or someone else made threats before carrying out violent acts, yet management failed to take any action. So since violence in the workplace can put an employer in such a pickle, what can an employer do to help mitigate that liability? Since workplace violence can take many different forms, it's difficult to anticipate the many different vulnerabilities that employees face. According to a report by Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, workplace violence incidents arise out of a variety of circumstances. Some involve criminals robbing taxi cab drivers, convenience stores, or other retail operations, clients or patients attacking providers in the healthcare service, social service offices, or disgruntled workers seeking revenge, or domestic abuse that spills over to the workplace. So the best approach to limiting lawsuits from workplace violence for the employer is to minimize the chance that employees, customers, and others will ever be at risk of a physical or verbal assault. When companies attempt to create a safe workplace for employees or customers, they probably should consider they probably consider slip and falls or other types of dangers, but employees first need to know that workplace violence is a real thing. So it's because of this that it's up to the employee to ensure a safe working environment for all their employees. Also, workplace violence is often the result of poorly managed stress, and this stress can be caused by tension from management, disorganization within the firm, and changes in the workplace. A common preventative measure is the practice of background checks on all incoming employees. These checks can include psychological scans, emotional tests, and more in order to ensure that the employee can keep a level head in the workplace. Some employers are hiring industrial organizational psychologists to diagnose problems before they happen. In addition to hiring special staff, several organizations have instituted workplace violence committees, comprised of members from each level of the firm. And the last measure that should be considered to prevent workplace violence is the termination of the employee, which can lead to further stress within the organization if the employee continued to work there. Also, innovative solutions to the workplace violence should be considered also. While the best solution to workplace violence is preventing it from occurring in the first place, some firms are finding new ways to ensure it doesn't happen at all. Some firms have actually instituted confidential company hotlines where employees can anonymously lodge complaints. Organizations such as the Canadian Auto Workers Union are also offering advocacy programs to teach employees about the effects of abuse in the workplace and at home. It's important that all employees understand upon hiring that violence is not to be tolerated. Most top organizations now have mandatory training that addresses this when processed through human resources. That's the end of our presentation on workplace violence. Thank you for listening.